The story of Stalker 2 puts us in the shoes of a completely new character called Skiff, who is going in the zone to get a new apartment in Kiev. Amazing motivation. After being betrayed, he finds himself in Zalicia, where the player is introduced to one of the central factions of the zone, the Ward. I have to give props to GSC, they really made the Ward as unlikable as possible. Every faction member complains how they control everyone and everything, ruling over the zone with an iron fist. Their leader, Korshunov, is an extremely unlikable character, always being overly aggressive and angry. The Ward reminds me of the Brotherhood of Steel from Fallout 4. They're clearly the bad guys, being extremely militaristic and bloodthirsty, but if the player ever wants to join them, you can. Why would you ever do that? During the course of this video, I love to describe the Ward as duty on steroids, but they're even worse. In Stalker 2, the Ward is portrayed in such a negative sight that no one wants to root for them. They actively try to destroy the zone and hold every faction at bay, unlike Duty, whose goal was to purify the zone of all its dangers, like mutants and bandits. There's no reason to pick the Ward's side, as there are no positive points or arguments towards their faction. We're also introduced to Richter, who's the only lunar with a somewhat different face. Then we make our way to Garbage, more precisely the Slag Heap. Garbage is an interesting location, as just like Zaton, both stalkers and bandits are living there together. This location is made even more unique by the fact that some of the bandit members are puppets installed by Duty or Freedom. Now, after Varan gives you the quest to kill those bandit members, and considering that you can fake their deaths or just kill Varan directly, I really thought you could change what factions are dominating over Garbage. But no, all you get for sparing them is a stash. Upon coming back to Slag Heap, after getting the scanner, you are introduced to your first important choice, followed by a cutscene where Skiff reassembles an AK-47. Let's talk about the cutscenes for a bit. I can't deny the fact that they look absolutely gorgeous and extremely epic. Everything from the movement of the actors and the music during cutscenes is top notch. But the real question is, why is this in Stalker? Stalker had its fair share of cutscenes, but they weren't over-the-top Call of Duty style, with characters disassembling an AK in front of you. The cutscenes tried to be way too serious. The entire idea with Skiff playing a role in deciding the fate of not only the entire zone, but also the whole world is very strange. We'll come back to this later. The weird-looking PDA points us to Wild Island, a base of ex-Monolithians. As soon as we get there, we can witness an internal conflict in the faction. Strider, from Call of Pripyat, advocates against the monolith. He promises to never come back to these ways of living. Meanwhile, Faust, one of the monolith's preachers, believes that their god is not dead, and that it is their destiny to come back under his control. This scene is amazing as it introduces us to a confrontation directly inside the faction, showing this rupture between the two types of Monolithians. When I saw this cutscene, I immediately thought of a chain of side quests where we could do something to prevent an uprising of Monolithians in the faction. Strider often talks about how they're isolated from the others, still being considered a threat. This could have been a great opportunity for the player to create a bridge between the two factions. Just like in Call of Pripyat, we could show the rest of the world that the monolith has changed and that they can be trusted. The moment I visited Noontide, I was convinced that this would be our goal with this faction. But turns out everything gets thrown out of the window because the monolith comes back. As a veteran of the series, I was really hyped about the monolith coming back. But it ruined the entire point of Noontide. Why introduce us to a faction that gets wiped out immediately afterwards? In addition, Stalker 2 is the sequel of the franchise, so it should expand on the ideas of the original and continue its story, so it makes even more sense that the monolith would be free. In Clear Sky, the monolith was omnipresent and preventing stalkers from venturing further. In Shadow of Chernobyl, the sea consciousness controlling monolith is destroyed by Strelok, marking a change in the zone. a change that's demonstrated in Call of Pripyat, where monolithians start to doubt their god and some even become free. So logically, the continuation of these events will be the entirety of the monolith becoming free and getting slowly integrated in the Stalker community. But no, scratch that, the monolith is back. The epic comeback of the Talking Stone happens during the SIRCCA mission, but before that we visit Zaton, where nothing changed. Sure, bandits and stalkers seem to be quite separated, but even in Call of Pripyat, we could betray Beard, so it's not like it's a new addition. Except this time, all of the events are orchestrated by a woman who tries to install her control over Zaton. Of course, once again, we can either side with Beard and Sultan or betray them. The outcome is the same, nothing changes, it's just that one of the traders becomes unavailable. Although I have to admit, the ending of this quest is pretty epic.
Stop by. This ship ain't going anywhere.
The entire questline in Zaton is an introductory sequence to the swamp region, which contains Clear Sky's base. To be honest, the first impression you get after revisiting the base is astonishing. Seeing a place you could call home, now decrepit and destroyed, creates a great feeling, both nostalgic and tragic. Although the same thing cannot be said about the lore you can find out about Clear Sky. If you decide to take your time and read the incredible information you find here, you will be disgusted by what was done with the game's story. Turns out that members of Clear Sky were always working with the sea consciousness, and Scar was already an agent programmed to kill Strelok. This is the single biggest retcon ever. With this newfound knowledge, it's easier to forget that Clear Sky even existed. The entire game makes no sense with this revelation. The first portion of the game is spent searching for clues about Strelok's group, because Clear Sky doesn't know anything about them. But since they work with the sea consciousness, they should be already aware of his location, making the entire first portion of the game useless. Thankfully, the second part of the game also becomes worthless. During the events in Limansk, the abandoned hospital and the CNPP, members of Clear Sky and the Monolith are constantly killing each other, and are actively trying to kill Scar. Which makes absolutely zero sense, because the Monolith is directly controlled by the common consciousness. So in the end, we have agents of SIRCCA fighting other agents of the same faction trying to kill Strelok. I really feel like I don't have to explain what's wrong here, but I know there will be people defending this alternative storyline made up in Stalker 2. Why would the common consciousness destroy hundreds of their own men to convince Scar to kill Strelok? Furthermore, they don't even have to convince Scar because, as was already mentioned, when he arrives at the Clear Sky base, he is already a programmed agent of SIRCCA. The entire Clear Sky faction dies just to make it seem more believable to Scar that they're enemies. Damn, SIRCCA really wanted to kill Strelok. You might think that this is the end of the epic story revelations, but no. In fact, it is revealed to us in Stalker 2 that emissions are not controlled by sea consciousness. So the entire explanation given by Lebedev at the start of the game that emissions are used by the sea consciousness to prevent Strelok from getting to the heart of the zone, and that they are destabilizing the zone itself, are all trash. Turns out it just so happens to be emissions when Strelok is getting close to the CNPP. This entire plot twist completely destroys the lore and story of the 3 games. Thankfully, this retcon isn't heavily focused on during the main story of Stalker 2, but the simple fact that in a couple of notes, the developers can destroy the entirety of a game's lore is absolutely frightening. And it makes me wonder what other amazing story revelations are hidden in other messages found all throughout the zone. After a detour to Zaton, we get the SIRCCA mission, where it is revealed to us a ton of lore about artifacts, anomalies, and experiments. First of all, the scientists at SIRCCA developed a cheat engine to spawn in artifacts and anomalies, which makes me wonder, why do stalkers still look for artifacts and who they sell them to if SIRCCA can produce an indefinite amount of them. Another amazing story revelation was that artifacts don't work outside of the zone, which makes the entire point of searching for artifacts to then sell them on the mainland irrelevant, as they simply don't work. But compared to other retcons, this is negligible. We'll also find out that SIRCCA spawned an anomaly in Skiff's house, which is why it got destroyed. But the artifact that Skiff found is so special that it's directly linked to the zone and will allow scientists to get infinite energy from the generators. What the actual... Now, to be honest, I'm not an expert in the lore of Stalker, but the entire idea of getting unlimited energy thanks to a super powerful artifact sounds very strange to me. Here we get two completely useless choices. The first one is related to Herman. We either kill him and never see him again, or let him go and never see him again. There's no reward, no additional dialogue or karma, nothing.
The funniest part is that if you're going for the ward's ending, Herman shows up out of nowhere and the NPCs just tell you that, oh, it was all an illusion, you didn't actually kill him. So from the start, you had no choice whatsoever.
But this choice isn't important because the buttons aren't gigantic. The second important event makes us choose between Noontide and the ward. Fun fact, it doesn't matter whose side you pick, the monolith will still be revived, destroying Noontide. You might think it's important to side with Noon, that way you're sure to not get the ward ending. But that's also fake, as near the end of the game, we get the option to join the ward. After destroying hundreds of their soldiers and fucking up all of their plans, we can just shake hands with Korshunov and forget about everything that happened. Upon escaping SIRCCA, all hell breaks loose. The monolith comes back and starts attacking everyone, just like in the good old days. This is another problem I have with the story of Stalker 2, as it heavily relies on nostalgia. Remember how Sidorovich gave you side quests in Cordon? Well, how about you do the same exact quest again? Remember the ending of Shadow of Chernobyl? Well, we remade them, but in first person. Remember the PDA Sherlock held? Well, it's back. And if you didn't get it the first time, here it is again. But this time when Sherlock dies, he does the same animation as in the intro. Oh my god. This is so cheap and just brings more questions than answers. Why does Sid have the same problems as before? Did he really not learn anything? How can we see memories of Sherlock that didn't even happen? These are not canonical endings. Did SIRCCA open a portal to a parallel reality or something? Why does Sherlock still carry his goddamn PDA with him? Is he still trying to complete the quest? This makes no sense. I'm not saying that the sequel doesn't need to have references to previous games. It's the sequel after all. But it shouldn't be like this. The ending of the Three Captains quest is pretty good. Visiting the base of Clear Sky feels amazing and tragic. The revelation scene of the Doctor's true identity is very well done, because instead of outright copying the original, it expands on the game's world, but we'll cover that a bit later. Another problem I have is that Stalker can't let go of its characters. Okay, Beard, Sultan, Voronin, Miklucha, Sidorovich, all of these characters are important and it makes sense why they didn't move on or just die. But why are all the side characters here? Wolf, Grey, even the Hunter are still here? These are side characters not important to the story of the game. You can barely even talk to them. To include these characters was a mistake, because their absence would show changes that happen in the zone, the fact that stalkers come and go, which is one of the central themes of Stalker 2. Once again, it makes you ask unnecessary questions, like why is Wolf still in the rookie village after 10 years? What's next? You're gonna tell me that Scar survived? Oh yeah, that's right. We interacted a little bit with the Spark faction up until this point. Sure, we did some quests in Zaton and met with Scar in Wild Island, but it's only now in the second portion of the game that we can join them with the Dugas raid. At first, Spark is presented as a copycat of Freedom, but only in the late stages of the game their true purpose is revealed to us. Turns out Scar and his friends want to create some sort of zone matrix that contains the minds of everyone who died here. This is a very strange idea and something that wasn't mentioned at all during the events of previous games. Not only is their idea equivalent to believing that your virtual AI girlfriend is real, but it also heavily affects the lore of the game. Like now we have ghosts of stalkers living in the zone. But the main reason I don't like Spark is Scar. And here we move on to the holy trio of stalkers and how each of these characters were flipped, contorted and transformed to be completely different people. The most noticeable changes happen to Scar. Every cutscene with this man is extremely cringe-inducing, with the mercenary jumping and screaming all the time. One would think that his brain got completely fried from the emissions, but the reality is much more complicated. We've already talked about the biggest retcon that destroyed the entire lore of Clear Sky. So, following these events, the devs decided to completely decimate the entire story of Clear Sky as well, because who cares anyway? The biggest surprise was of course to see Scar alive and well. As I previously stated, I'm not an insane lore master of the Stalker games, but something tells me that when you're in the middle of nowhere with no cover and there's a super powerful mission happening, you're pretty much dead, even if you're Scar. Instead, Scar became brainwashed like Sherlock, but received the memories of Marshall, which is why he acts like the Joker. I hope I'm not the only one who finds this plot twist to be completely unnecessary and outright idiotic. It would be better if Scar just stayed dead. He went through an incredible character assassination, becoming a completely different character. The same thing can be said about Sherlock himself. I strictly remember when during the ending of Call of Pripyat, Sherlock emerged and told the military that he wants to destroy the zone. Furthermore, during the events of the game, he becomes one of the leading figures at SIRCCA. So, based on what we've seen in previous games, Sherlock is against the zone and its hardships, helping scientists research it and actively trying to get rid of it. But all of a sudden in Stalker 2, the Legend of the Zone considers the zone to be a holy grail that needs to be protected. Additionally, all of Sherlock's efforts are undone once we find out that the sea consciousness survived. Kind of, I'm not really sure if they're a pre-recorded message or an actual living entity because different endings show them differently. I don't necessarily hate the idea of a character's goals and beliefs changing, but it has to be explained. We need to see how the character evolves and changes his point of view. Sherlock just says, yeah, now I'm like that, without any explanation. Sure, he tells us that the zone gave him a new life, but when did he realize that? What made him realize that? Is it when he was working at SIRCCA? None of these questions are answered, and even if they are, they weren't delivered properly. Thankfully, the only character who doesn't go through this immense character assassination is Degtyaryov. But that's mostly because we speak to him only 2 times during the entirety of the game and thus don't really get to see his point of view. Nevertheless, the simple existence of Degtyaryov in Pripyat is already strange, as he also left the zone, although here it's much easier to explain, as he previously lived in Pripyat, so we can say that he just got very emotional and nostalgic, just like me when playing this game. One thing you've probably noticed is that at first the story section was linear, and now it went all over the place. And that's not because I don't know how to write scripts, but it's a perfect representation of how I felt after completing the SIRCCA mission. It was genuinely difficult for me to rebuild the events of the second part of the game because they're so all over the place. So in the first section of the game we started in the Lesser Zone, then we went to Garbage, Wild Island, did some quests there, then Zeton with some more quests, and then we take a detour to the swamps and arrive at SIRCCA. For now the path is very linear and makes sense, we explore each location one after the other. Now look what happens after SIRCCA. From SIRCCA we have to go to the Lesser Zone to do a raid there, then restock, then to the Dugas, then to Malachite, then to the chemical plant to find out Faust's entire lore, then back to the Dugas and back to Malachite. And from there we have to go to the Red Forest, skip Yantar, skip the truck cemetery, who cares? We do some quests here, this is my favorite part. we have to go to Cordon. This is literally the other side of the map, then to the burnt forest. From there, would you kindly walk 2 kilometers to Malachite, where we get captured and sent to the chemical plant, from which we have to go directly to Yanov. What is this? This looks like the drawing of a schizophrenic person. Imagine if the story path was something like this. This is so much simpler and similar to how it was before, straight line through the areas of the game. Or maybe if they really wanted you to go 2 times to the Dugas, do something like this, I don't know. There were so many ways of making the story path less convoluted. Another factor that was making the story even more complex was the need to over-explain everything. One of the key aspects of the Stalker series were the various mysteries surrounding the zone and its inhabitants. This air of mystery created a sense of fear of the unknown that reinforced the game atmosphere and sometimes even gameplay. The need of Stalker 2 to explain absolutely every aspect of the game got rid of this feeling and ironically opened the door to even more questions. For example, remember how monolithians could stay in radioactive areas for days without any problems? No, you never thought this aspect needed explanation? Well, GSC doesn't think that. Turns out the monolith had those special regenerators with them at all times. That's right, the Medigun from TF2 is now canon in Stalker. The question I asked myself the most when playing Stalker 2 was, what are you even yapping about? The problem I have with these new additions to the lore is not that it's not canon, but just because they sound so ridiculous and over the top. The fact that Faust is actually a controller and sees the very fabric of which the zone is made of is so insane. Sure, the original games also had their fair share of weird moments like the lore of the noosphere, but what we see in the sequel just feels too far-fetched. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this way. I'll be eager to hear your opinion in the comments. Before going into the 4 endings of the game, I want to address what the story lacks in my opinion. A good, detailed, and in-depth look into the game's themes and characters. The central theme of Stalker 2 is supposed to be the new zone and how it can become a beautiful home for a stalker. This is exactly what Richter mentions during that one cutscene. But the problem is that we don't get to see this side of the zone. Plus, the character development is lacking and incomplete in some places. The only person who has a good character arc is Strider, and that's probably why you still remember it. Normally, every single character arc needs to be similar to his, but they feel rushed. Richter is sad because while guiding some people they died, so then after progressing through the story, he's back being a guide. The same thing for Dalin. The last moments when we see him is during that scene at the generators. We don't even know if he survived, and we definitely don't get any closure on his moral dilemma and how it affected him. As was put in the numerous reviews I watched about this game, the story is just a collection of themes to think about. None of them are explored and delved into further than the surface level. To conclude the story section, let's talk about the endings of the game. Personally, I didn't like any of the endings, mostly because they all revolve around the fate of the entire world and the zone. I think it would have been better if the story stayed more grounded. Skiff is a nobody after all. The ending of Call of Pripyat was very emotional and epic, despite affecting only certain parts of the zone, which was fitting because Degtyaryov was just a soldier. He was no legend of the zone who could decide her fate. Which brings us to Strelok's ending. As was previously mentioned, Strelok wants to protect the zone and will use the last spot to take full control of her. Not only does this not fit with his ideas, but he also contradicts himself. He wants the zone to be free, yet he controls her. Furthermore, this enormous quarantine of the zone will eventually lead to its downfall, as stalkers are reliant on resources like food, weapons, and tools coming from the mainland. Without these resources and an influx of new stalkers, the zone will be a barren wasteland with only mutants and anomalies. Funny enough, this appears to be the ultimate endgame for every ending. Scar's ending puts everyone in one big simulation, turning them into zombies, leaving the rest of the zone to rot. The Ward ending destroys and abuses the zone, And Strelok's, well, we already discussed it. The only ending that doesn't destroy the zone is Project Y, but the funny thing is that instead of the zone being ravaged, it's the rest of the world that gets decimated. I'm genuinely surprised there's no secret ending where Skiff just goes full Strelok mode and just destroys the last capsule, so no one can use it. Usually I'm a fan of bittersweet or just bad endings in video games, but here it feels completely different. I think the main problem I have with the story is that it's way too grandiose. Skiff's actions affect not only the entire zone, but also the rest of the world, as if he was some sort of chosen one. Of course, it might be a personal preference thing, as I've seen many people praise the story and its development, but I personally didn't enjoy it all that much.